Maybe I have questioned what is in front of my eyes my whole life. Not so ideal for my parents and those attempting to direct me into a reasonable, content existence, but what can I say? I have just the right amount of strengths and self-management skills to sneak under the radar, and just enough campaigner and rebel to cause a ruckus. What I have never questioned is what I see without my eyes. A deeper understanding of the wisdom and flow of life that is happening beyond the rat race. A depth without borders, a depth outside of the box. I am here in these words projecting out of your speakers to shine a light on a different idea. To spread seeds of possibility, to offer balance and disruption. To adjust the camera towards the kinks and shadows of ourselves, and to appreciate every nook and crevice of our existence. I am offering this podcast as a collaborative experiment with life, a journey of freedom making and change shaking, a new way that starts within you.
Without meaningful protest, we'll never really get meaningful change. Clayoquot Sound is a good example of that. Mm-hmm. So there is times when meaningful protest does play a role. And if just left to timber producers, we'll cut everything down. We really need to find a balance between the protesters and the ones that want to cut everything down to really hone in on good forest management practices. We have a long ways to go with forest management, but we've come a long ways as well. Mm-hmm. And with education comes knowledge. For everyone that really wants to make a difference, get a little bit educated, maybe before you chain yourself to the tree.
Hi everyone, I am so excited to be back in the podcast world with you all, and what a better way to kick it off but with the conversation I've been desiring to have since my visit to the Vancouver Island blockades of Fairy Creek. My friend Joel. I glean insight from his many positions and perspectives in the 30 years of coastal BC forestry, including ski resort management, forestry engineer, and avid mountain biker. I hope you enjoy. Thanks, Joel, for doing this with me.
It's my pleasure.
I want to start by you giving me just your own list of various backgrounds in career and hobby life that are in relation to forests that you can think of.
Well, I'm just about 50 years old now, and I've been recreating in a forest in some way, shape, or form. I would say from the time I was a wee little boy that I could really remember. I've spent my life outside, whether it be fishing, whether it be hiking, whether it be looking for mushrooms, whether it be locating roads for forestry operations or timber cruising. I've spent a lot of time outside. I mean, I love being outside. And the forest has been really huge part of my life. I've been in some pretty magnificent forests, and forests are a pretty wholesome place for me.
Mm-hmm. What constitutes a magnificent forest to you?
Well, it has a lot to do with a feeling of what it is to be standing there in that location at that time. The senses all about it, what stimulates the visual, mental capacity, what triggers in my brain, what hits my nose, the smell that's there, the sounds of when I'm walking through the forest. And every forest has a different feel, and some are like, oh yeah, I've been in a million of these forests, and there's no real special moment. But then I've been in some forests that are just like, wow, like when you're watching Star Wars and you're seeing them zip through the Ewok forest and those huge Douglas firs. Well, I've been mountain biking in that forest. And forests like that, they have a real deep resonating impact on me. My own personal feeling about it. I think every forest has a magnificence. Some forests are truly special.
I've also watched you ski through some forests.
I have skied through some forests. Yes, some burnt, some not burnt, some super tight, others really well spaced. I've set up some pretty magnificent winter camps in forests too. I'm very fortunate to have made quite a wonderful career in the forest industry. For my super deep connection with the forest, I'm not proud to say, but also I am proud to say that I've made it in the forest industry, logging and regenerating forests. I've done everything from regeneration surveys, pest surveys, and regenerating stands, to timber cruising of second growth and old growth forests, to engineering roads and laying out cut blocks for forestry operations in a variety of different capacities. Lots of clear cuts with reserves, some single stem operations, helicopter select and helicopter logging. So I've got quite a well-rounded career in forestry management and forestry operations.
What led you into a life of forestry?
I knew I needed to do something outside. I had originally thought about becoming a conservation officer, but I didn't like the idea of packing a gun around as part of my career, and I didn't like the idea of having to confront people that are in the middle of nowhere packing even bigger guns. So I thought, well, there's got to be something else I could do. And then I started doing some research on this forest technologist program that was being offered out in Nanaimo at Malaspina University College. And in the early 90s, forestry was a pretty booming career. And I thought, well, that's outside.
I like forests.
I could try that. Yeah. And 30 years later, I'm still doing it.
Here you are.
Yes. I like to at least have some influence on the way that we manage it. I feel like being a forest professional and a member of a professional organization gives me a voice. It gives me some meaning to really be proactive about how we manage forests in British Columbia.
How do we manage forests in British Columbia?
How do we manage forests in British Columbia? We as a collective whole, we as an organization, we as a society, it's a very broad question. Forests are managed through various degrees of legislation. They're managed in varying types of tenures. All tenures have legislation that guide the management. The annual allowable cuts are designated through the chief forester of the province, and they're determined every 10 years. Does the chief forester have adequate information to designate the AACs that they do for timber supply areas? I have my own opinions on that. And I guess my opinion on that would be every 10 years, since the time that we have been in the legislative process where the chief forester sets annual allowable cuts for timber supply areas, to my knowledge, over the years, annual allowable cuts have decreased. So if we're going to say that as forestry professionals that we're managing forests to be sustainable, I think we really need to understand what the different types of sustainable are. And we have to categorize ourselves into what type of sustainability are we managing our forests to be. Sustainability has different meanings to different people, to different organizations, to different user groups. If I'm an environmentalist and I'm thinking about sustainability, I'm thinking about sustainability for the environment, for the little critters that live out there. And I might be of the opinion that clear cutting a forest can't be sustainable from an ecological point of view. And that could well be a true statement, absolutely. If I'm managing forests as an economy and I know that I can plant a tree and that tree will grow, and given a long enough duration of time, I can harvest that tree again. I can harvest another round of forest from that same area, and that's sustainable. And that's sustainable over a period of time. If I'm going to talk about sustainability in, say, an old growth perspective, well, if I cut down a tree that's 500 years old and I'm only going to let the new set of trees grow to be 50 years old, is that sustainable? Well, it's not sustainable from an old growth perspective. So you ask, how do we manage our forests? We manage it for a diversity of needs. We try and manage for some old growth, and I would say personally, we manage primarily for economics. We need to provide an economy for people that live in our communities. We need to provide a economy for people outside of our community. Wood products are deemed to be one of the best construction materials that we produce on Earth. And for some reason, economy says we should be producing it for the whole world. I don't think that's very sustainable. And I think that when we look at how our annual allowable cuts reduce year after year after year, I think maybe our chief foresters are also realizing that at the rates that we cut our forests, it's not sustainable for long-term economic value over a very long period of time. And that we really need to focus on what the right size of that annual cut is so that we can really manage the forest to have the social and political justifications of forest management be organically met. There needs to be enough old growth to maintain biodiversity. There needs to be enough second growth to maintain an economy, and there needs to be enough forested land base for all of us to enjoy from a recreational standpoint, and for the planet to still be whole with all of the ecological importance that the forest has to the planet.
So help me, as somebody who doesn't speak the forestry language very much, to put that in a simple term. There is an organization or a group of legislation and people that look at our British Columbia forests in 10-year viewpoints based on plots of land. Is that what a 10-year is?
Well, so tenures designate ownership or use. So we
kind
have
of like properties.
They're like properties, but more like management units. So, for example, you might have a woodlot license, or a forest license, or a timber sale license, or a tree farm license, or a forestry license to cut, or a First Nations woodlot license. There's all of these different types of tenures. the different tenures have different legislative practices that guide that type of forest management. All of those fall under an overarching guise of forestry legislation. And in each one of those tenure types would be assigned an annual allowable cut. That cut is determined through the chief forester based on a myriad of data inputs. Now, the data inputs, in layman's terms, I guess you could say, is results reporting. So every person that manages a tenure is obligated to report results from their forest stewardship plan from their operation. And from those results, the chief forester will accumulate all of that data and come up with a decision. So you can imagine that accumulation of data is really only as good as the information that's being put into the system.
Yeah, my next question was going to be, is it possible to have all the accurate data?
I would say that the data that's being provided for the chief forester to formulate that judgment is fragmented. I would say that that chief forester doesn't actually get all of the most up-to-date information for their decision. With all resorts, reporting they have a timeline, and like any human, organizations run very similar. We love to procrastinate. Well, organizations love to procrastinate. And sometimes information gets into a system right away. Other times,
there's some delay.
if they have 5 years to report the data, well, the first 4 years you might not get much data, and then on the 5th year you'll get as much as what goes in. And so I would say there's definitely fall down in all of that information gathering, I think, for sure.
A lot of people believe that everyone is doing the best they can. Are you one of those people?
No, I mean, I'm not.
Neither am I.
I really think that people are doing as good as they want to be doing. I think that there's organizations that demand that data quality be one of their top priorities, but data management costs money, and companies operate on the bottom line.
Time and money. Time is money.
Time and money, and time is money.
Yes. You were talking about sustainability, and depending on the group you're talking about and their version of sustainability, or depending on the aspect of sustainability that we're talking about, do you feel like there's a way to practice forestry that is really balanced?
I think if we could take the economics out of forestry, I think that we would manage forests very differently. I think that there are countries out there that practice much better forest sustainability. They practice in much smaller increments. They practice in different types of systems. They have tenures associated with mills. They manufacture products within their country, and then they export a finished product. They have, say, a client that's already looking for a certain parcel of wood, and they go out and purchase a complement of wood before it's even cut down. And so every chunk of wood that gets harvested from that site is already going to a buyer. There isn't big waste piles of debris that get lit up at the end to get rid of all the things that didn't get utilized. We need to go to more of a model like that. I mean, I was just reviewing an area that had been logged as part of a helicopter tenure. This block was logged, and I was reviewing it, and I was sad. I mean, there was still a whole forest left lying in that opening of logs that are never going to be utilized. And there they are, sitting on the ground. And I mean, I would say that the organization took half of the volume off of that site. And then they decided that it was more profitable to pay the penalty for leaving the rest of it there than it was to harvest it. Well, that's not sustainable.
Right.
I mean, how can the environment sustain that? How can we, as forest professionals, say that we're practicing sound forestry principles when you leave half of the volume of
the penalty is the better choice than not cutting half of those trees down.
Yeah. And so we get stuck in these conundrums of meeting volume requirements on a plan to economically. So I've met this goal up here. I've met my volume goal because, I've sold volume. But then I have this principle of forest utilization that I'm only hitting halfway on. Well, that's not good forest management. But I understand from an economic perspective why it's like that.
Yeah.
If the bottom line is you need to show shareholder profit, well, you got to show shareholder profit.
It's a lot of complexity to forest management.
Well, it's a huge complexity, and it's one that the province is currently really looking into with how they manage forest utilization. So provincial legislation is looking at how to tackle that. But as someone that's been in the industry for almost 30 years, I don't know how we tackle that without taking the economics out of it. Our trade agreements with the United States doesn't really allow for it, because the real solution is a form of subsidy, and the whole softwood lumber agreement is formed around BC forest operations not being subsidized.
I like that you can see the many sides and argue to or fro any one of them, and I feel like that's a very valuable discernment, seeing the whole sides. If you could change one thing about forestry, what would it be? One thing.
Colette, it would be the utilization piece, because that's the one that, to me, it's the bane of our current existence. I'm all about forestry as a renewable resource. Managed properly, it truly is a renewable resource. Our homes built of wood are truly carbon sinks, as long as they don't burn. But we have on the coast anyways, because that's where the bulk of my expertise is where I've worked the majority of my career. Coastal logging practices generate so much waste, and it's waste that could be utilized under a different framework. I mean, we have mills in BC that are literally shutting down because of what's perceived as fiber shortage. Well,
because we're leaving 50% of the trees on the ground sometimes?
Well, I mean, these are all contributing factors. There's really no such thing as a volume shortage here on the coast. I mean, timber producers, log buyers, log sellers are very creative with how they manage inventories. We can't export logs from the coast unless the domestic market has been satisfied. We export logs all the time, so that means domestic market must be satisfied. But we have mills closing down on a regular basis because they have no fiber. Well, how can that?
Perplexed.
Well, it is a perplexing thing. the reality is the fiber isn't available for those plants at the rate that they're willing to pay for it. Because the cost to develop the timber is more than what the primary timber user is willing to pay. So for example, if you're a pulp mill that's looking for chips, you can only sell your product for so much money on the open market. So there is it's a fluctuating ceiling, but it's fixed at a certain amount of what that producer can pay for raw material. Those are things that we really, in order to truly be a sustainable province that produces sustainable forestry products for a long term, for economics and for ecological benefits, we need to really hone in on that utilization piece, because we have to log more forests every time we don't utilize all of the functional parts of that forest. So if you were to take a licensee that logs a block and then does their waste assessment after that logging, and that waste assessment comes out at 20,000 cubic meters of avoidable waste, well, that's 20,000 cubic meters of volume that needs to come from a standing forest in another spot throughout the land base. Well, 20,000 cubic meters of avoidable waste, that's not uncommon.
I don't even know what 20,000 cubic meters would be like.
Well, I mean, when you see a highway truck
yes,
that's going up and down the highway,
filled with
and
logs.
it's got all those little logs on it, it's filled up to the top.
Yeah,
Well, that's 30 cubic meters,
30, not
Yes.
20,000.
not 20,000.
Oh my goodness.
So, I mean, when you get into a cut block that still has 50% of the volume lying on the ground, I mean,
It's a lot.
it's
many logging trucks.
It's many logging trucks. And so, when you think about that over 150, 200 cut blocks, even
a
more than
region
that,
and a province and a country.
but just in 1 year of harvesting, when you look at it as an overall whole of all the licensees across all of, say, just Vancouver Island in general, it's a lot of waste. I mean, even if we were to dumb that right down and say that it was 3,000 or 4,000 cubic meters, 5,000 is an easy number, 5,000 cubic meters of avoidable waste, and then you've got over 200 cut blocks up and down the province in a year, not even exaggerating. So 200 times 5,000 is 100,000, right? Well, that's a lot of highway trucks of wood that aren't going to a mill somewhere, not getting processed, and that's 100,000 cubic meters of volume that's got to come from the total harvesting land base. So you multiply that over, the last 70 years that we've been using chainsaws to cut down timber, you can imagine that
It's a lot of trees.
it's a lot of unutilized forest products that a lot of it ends up just going up in smoke at the end of the year for hazard abatement. So, I mean,
It's baffling, and the simplicity of it is like, of course, waste is the thing. Because waste is the thing across the board in a human life. We know what garbage production is, and that our landfills are not really sustainable, and we know that like even food waste is like, I think number 3 on the list of carbon issues globally, and like, so it just makes so much sense that of course it's waste.
it's waste. Yeah, it's all the things that we're not using.
I never knew that there was that much waste in it.
Well, but you do know that because every time you go down the logging road, what do you see stacked up? And
For sure. I just didn't realize the big picture as you widen and widen and widen and zoom out.
Well, I mean, because we look at, like,
Yeah.
I'm riding my bike down the Forestry road, and I'm looking into a cut block, and I see these big, massive haystacks of treetops. And for the average person, they're just looking at that going, oh, well, I guess they couldn't use it for anything.
That's what I mean.
But the reality is, you can use it. I mean, if you had a mobile chipping truck, you just
make a bunch of pulp.
You run it all into
and mulch.
You take it down to a transfer facility, but it all costs money.
Yeah, for sure.
And the value of it isn't worth the cost of what it is to manufacture it into a secondary product.
Yeah.
So if there was a subsidy type program that would allow that to get to a secondary user, it would be a benefit.
Right. Cool.
And we could cut less forests because we would have better utilization.
That's a good one.
It's an opinion.
It's a good opinion, I think. Sounds on point. I just learned a whole lot in that simple answer. And I feel like I already do know a lot about forests. And I know that there's tons of people out there, many who are listening, who don't even know half as much about forestry or forests, or don't even live near one, or don't get to experience the circle of life of a forest. Those people, well, everybody. What do you think that most people misunderstand about forests?
Well, that's kind of a complicated question because everybody's different.
What do you think is largely misunderstood?
I think a lot of people maybe don't really quite grasp the full-on economic importance of forestry operations and forest harvesting. Not to detract anything from the forest ecosystem. Forest ecosystem is also tremendously important until we get to a balancing point and really understanding the true role that forests play in the overall ecological hierarchy of the planet, largely how they affect climate change. I think that we really have to understand that there is still a significant balance between forest conservation and forest management. Because where we truly need to conserve forests for ecological means, we also need to harvest forests for everything that we use in day-to-day life. Building shelter, making toilet paper, having books, newspaper, packaging. Look around you, and almost everything you see or touch or interact with in your day has some relation to a wood product. I mean, at one point in time, even the food that you're eating maybe had food grade cellulose in it produced when they were operating the Port Alice cellulose mill. So, I mean, wood products play an enormous role in how humans interact on the planet. And it's really important to understand that, although we have these true organic attachments to forests, we also have an inorganic attachment to stuff that comes from those forests.
Good one. I'm humbled. So in all of your years and positions in this field, what's some of the major things that you've come to learn for yourself?
It's always evolving. Being part of a professional organization where part of the mantra is continual improvement. It really is an excellent experience to be able to look back on past practices, see what worked really successfully, see what didn't work very well, and see where the challenges lie ahead of us, and to really see what the next generation is bringing to the forest industry in ways of innovation and technologies.
I so love that answer because it seems like what we do in our own individual human life, right? We try things and we see what works well and what doesn't, and we tweak as we go, and we learn something new, and we evolve in some other way. And it's so easy to forget, first of all, that that's happening in another person's life and not just ours. And it's so easy to forget that that's then what's happening in a system that is human based and run, it's a good reminder of that for sure.
And it might not look like it on the surface.
It's easy to be a critic.
Well, I mean, we're programmed like that.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, our whole society revolves around criticizing what people are doing.
Yes.
But sometimes we have to take a step back.
Yes.
And maybe really analyze some data before we make the full critic.
Right. Remembering that we're always doing that, and that we don't always have all the accurate data necessary. And
well, and sometimes we don't want that accurate data.
That's true.
The accurate data doesn't make the same headline.
That's true. So, person like me, there's nothing that I feel like I could do to walk into your workspace one day and wave my magic wand and change things the way I would like them, or there's nothing. Sometimes, often, a lot of people just feel like it's such a big thing outside of themselves that it's beyond them. There's nothing they can do. Do you have a opinion or insight as to like how any one person could make a difference when it comes to a forest?
Well, I mean, I think some people, they have their own opinions and they chain themselves to trees.
I've done that.
And it's a way.
Yes.
I mean,
it's a way to try.
It makes headlines.
Mm-hmm.
It makes people turn their heads. However, what it doesn't do is it doesn't do anything per se to improve forestry policy.
Right.
And for people that really want to make a change, get involved in government. Get involved and be a policymaker. Get involved with reading your local paper to see when forest stewardship plans are being reviewed. See what it is that chief forester is making their decision on. Every tenure that operates under a forest stewardship plan has to have a public review. And in those public reviews gives any individual in British Columbia an opportunity for an opinion. Having an influence on one little part of a plan, just as an example, if I'm reviewing a plan, if I'm doing a public review, and somebody has a comment about my forest stewardship plan, well, I have to publish that there was this comment, and I need to address what that comment was. And in that little way, well, that person's had some form of an influence. But if you want to influence on a grand scale, you have to be involved in the plan. You have to be involved in a government process in some way, shape, or form, because it's government that forms the legislating policies that govern our profession. So chaining yourself to a tree is great for that one moment to shed a light on something.
What about in the middle of those things? Is there something in the middle of those things, like, so somebody is definitely not going to get out there and tie themselves to a tree because those numbers are small, and then there's people who don't think that they're influencers going at government policy level. Is there something for the average Joe or Jane in the middle?
For the average Joe and Jane in the middle, I would say get out there and enjoy the forest while it's there, because we don't know how long it's going to be there. Whether it's a forestry company that takes it down, fire that burns it down, a wind that blows it down, or a bug that infects it. I've worked in a lot of areas, Colette, where I'm standing in second growth forests, around 30 years old. And as I get up and into higher elevations and really look around the whole drainage. And it's like, wow, there's a lot of 20 to 30-year-old timber here, which means 20 to 30 years ago, it was all brown and whacked down. And I think that we have to not be there anymore with our forest management practices.
This whole conversation is a great reflection of the many conversations I have with people in my life, from those I love who want to cut everything down, to the people I have met along the way who can't help but voice their concern for our forests. No matter how different the opinions, there is always a sense of some necessity to meet in the middle, and yet the middle can seem so far away. Yet I know the middle path exists. It exists in us all, so I have faith that we can find it. Until next time, go find freedom in your forest.